Okay, guys, we are back today with a Coach Trap podcast. In this week, we are very lucky to be joined by the amazing Mark Miller. Just before we dive into a really deep conversation, I just want to remind you 90% of online coaches quit or fail. And there's a big reason why. It's a really complicated world at the moment. AI is making it so much harder. So, what can you do to escape the coach trap? You can click the link below to subscribe. But let's dive in. Mark, such a pleasure to have you on the show, mate. I'd love to know a little bit more about you, a little bit more about your journey into this space, and then let's dive in.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, guys, for having me. I'm really excited to be and just share a little bit and have an amazing conversation. A little bit about me. So I've been coaching for over a decade, right? So I've been doing this for about 10 years, on and off for various different reasons, across Southeast Asia to Africa, and also working with clients in the Americas as well. And there's various reasons why I got into coaching, right? But ultimately it's my love for wanting to help other people. And I mean, part of my coaching brand is much more because I believe that people have so much more to give, right? And I part of that is where I believe that people can give more, be more, and experience more. And it came down to a lot of hurt and heartache that I had to experience to get into this space. And I found elements where I came through stemming loss of a brother. And I had a pastor, I had a coach, and I had a psychologist that helped me through each of those. And from the pastor, I learned what it means to be pastoral, somebody who walks alongside you, somebody who can take care of you in that space. Through the coaching, I learned to step forward, to take my message and make it mean something. And through the psychology is where I learned to deal with depression, anxiety, etc. And it was in those spaces where I was like, man, I want to be able to be one of those for each person. And I found that the perfect framework to do that was to coach. And from living in Singapore, I worked within a special needs school. I was there for a couple of years. Then I was asked to come and work with first responders back in South Africa, which I ended up doing that. Still working with them on different projects along the way as kind of an executive coaching framework. And I decided to throw myself into that career. I was like, this is what I want to do. I enjoyed working with kids. It was probably one of the most challenging and most rewarding things I've ever done. And I took that energy of working with individuals that are struggling, and I took that energy into the space that I was working with the first responders, also individuals who struggle in a different way, and I help them manage themselves under pressure. So it's a very in-depth story of how I got here, but that's the most simplified version that I can give you in that space.
Mark, I absolutely love that. What I love about it more than anything, right, is you can't lead others down a path you haven't walked yourself, right? And Dan, for me and you, that's the real fundamentals of the coach trap, isn't it? In helping coaches and all this sort of space, right? Is you know, try to resonate, not trying to preach, right? So it's such an amazing story. Working under pressure, right? That's the biggest thing that I picked out in terms of like the coach. And it's such, I think burnout is such an overused word, right? I think when we were looking at like Answer the Public in Reddit and all that sort of stuff, it's one of the top 5 biggest words, right? Is burnout. Do you think that it's overused? What's your like thoughts on it? Do you think that maybe I'd love to know, from an expert, what's your real view on it?
So that's a complicated question because there is a real diagnostic framework for elements of burnout, right? And it has like real implications. That chronic fatigue is something that becomes a point where you just cannot function. Your brain fog is to a point where you cannot function. So there's real kind of consequence to having burnout. Is it overused? I think so, but I think anything within the mental health space right now is overused. You get people self-diagnosing themselves with an array of things. The amount of people that self-diagnose themselves with ADHD, or they say that they're on the spectrum, just to maybe feel that sense of inclusion, maybe give a label to what they're feeling, is quite high. But that's why I've referred to understanding what it means to be under pressure, because part and parcel of the work that I do is there's like the green zone where you're functioning, there's an orange zone where things are feeling that tense pressure, then there's that red zone where it's either going to lead you to stress, anxiety, burnout, depression, etc. And the space that I work in is you're in that orange zone, you're starting to feel these things, and you're quite self-aware that something's a little bit off. And it's that self-awareness that allows you to put yourself back into the place of, okay, here's strategies, things that you can do, move yourself back into the green zone. So I work in that kind of space. But in doing that, I've learned that a lot of people are like, oh, I've just burnt out and I just need a rest. And I'm like, in terms of the definition of burnout, you're not quite there, but you are definitely under pressure. You are feeling that my nervous system right now is overwhelmed and I cannot move forward. Maybe your amygdala is in hyperdrive, which is your fight, flight, freeze, fawn response. Your anterior cingulate cortex is trying to see everything as it's a part of fear response. And it's that version of like, okay, well, let's move you away from that. Let's not label it with burnout because you're not quite there, and make it more digestible. Because to just say I've got burnout, that labeling becomes a sense of self-fulfilling prophecy, and you tend to allow yourself to decline more once you've given yourself that badge. But if you're like, oh, I'm just dealing with pressure, it psychologically allows you to make it a framework that you can deal with and move on from, and start strategizing and putting things into place, just where you get to a point like, my nervous system can rest now. I can actually take control. I can think clearer. I can make the right decisions. The brain fog is a lot less. And that's the outcomes that we look for, especially in the work that I do. So is it being overused? I think so, but it's just for us to try and get that understanding. I mean, in a post-COVID world, we're trying to get understanding on an array of things. But yeah, it just allows you to manage it.
It's such a great question. Just before I pass something on to Dan, there's no way that I'm the sort of expert level that you are on this, right? So I can't wait to dive deep with you. I remember the first time when I was outside of coaching, when I was still working, I was introduced to this was through something called loss aversion. Is that right? So what I remember that was is when you ignore or high stake decisions are distorted, right? So actually working at a certain level of stress is good, right? And that's eustress in big brain,
Yep,
right? Is
yep,
that sort of stuff, right? But
yep,
if you do too much, try and fit too much into your life, your prefrontal cortex gets overwhelmed, right? And then you start pulling back, you start limiting yourself on those
yeah,
top stakes is. So actually, when people say actually, like creating a routine with self-care or, putting yourself first, having hobbies, actually your business will thank you because you'll be better at making high stakes decisions. Is that true, or is there a bit more that you can put into that before I sort of pass you on to Dan?
So yeah, I think you've summarized the gist of it, right? So you want
Yeah.
your prefrontal cortex. That's kind of the part of your brain that allows you to make clear, conscious decisions. So your higher order thinking comes from that. It gets a little bit more complicated onto now what different spheres and things you're talking with, and I don't want to get too complicated in that element. You want that part of your brain to be active, and doing so, having change is really good for that part of the brain to be like, okay, what can I deal with? Constant change on repetition, right? It goes to the element of, you were talking about Tony Robbins earlier, just before we jumped on here. Tony Robbins has his six human needs, right? And there's that balance between certainty and variety. And your brain really does like that balance. There's never going to be a 50-50% of it. But you have to have that element of variety just to shift your perspective and shift your focus. That allows your prefrontal cortex to come online. So one of the things that we talk about in the space of neuropsychology is metacognition, the ability to think about your thinking. So sometimes when people are overwhelmed, you don't have to say, I'm overwhelmed, right? You can say, I'm noticing that I am overwhelmed, or I'm noticing the feeling of overwhelm. And what that does is just separates you from that identity and allows your PFC, your prefrontal cortex, to come online and take action. And that goes down into your limbic system, which is the whole part of your kind of nervous system response to that. There's a lot of somatic things that you can do in terms of your body to help you regulate that. But ultimately, the way that you've put it, yeah, your prefrontal cortex is what you want to do. You can make clearer decisions by having that break, finding out how you rest, because a lot of people think that your resting is just like, oh, I need to get more sleep. It's not that at all. Sleep is critical. It's highly important, and most research indicates that you need about 8 hours of sleep. Anything below that is suboptimal. Doesn't matter really who you are.
Mm.
There's no indication that people really can run on 4 hours sleep. I think the hustle and grind culture created something quite damaging within that. And yeah, there might be people who respond a little better to less sleep, but it doesn't mean that they're not running on their 100%, right? Because of our circadian rhythms, we all run with energy in a different way. And our brains use different levels of energy. but you need that sleep to restore it. You need memory consolidation, all of that. But it's not just resting, it's how you rest. Like you said, go do a hobby. That can be a way of recharging. Yeah. So yeah, you pretty much nailed it.
Wow. Do you know what I loved about that, right? Dan, you're going to love this bit, right? I'm someone who's interested in this space, right? In terms of like that area of coaching. I'm not an expert level at it, right? Dan, Mark is obviously an expert, an answer that goes on that sort of level, right? Let's say like X and LinkedIn. We see lots of people post that. Right. Lots of people talk like, they know what talking and maybe don't. So Mark, I'm going to give you a question. I want to sit with you. I don't want you to answer it yet. So people giving out false information, especially on LinkedIn and X. You don't need to answer that yet. I'm going to come back to that, right? But Dan, with you, mate, what's your thoughts on this space? When I think of that, I think of like Andrew Huberman. I think of the X. So many people in that space, isn't there, Dan? Right? And LinkedIn. But how many of them do you reckon are actually quite authentic? Don't just like talk the talk, but walk the walk.
Yeah, that's the question. I think most coaches, I would say, on X, LinkedIn, everywhere, potentially don't have the experience that they think they do, or that they show people they do. I would say X is a really good place to share this kind of stuff because you can be a little bit controversial and a bit of controversialness. Is that a word? A little bit of that does really well on X. Something like you're lying if you think 8 hours sleep is enough, something like that. And then if you can back it up with all of the, the qualifications, all of the experience that you have, Mark, it's a recipe for success.
Yeah, it's a great space. So just before I come on to the false information post, right? So I saw something that went viral the other day, and it was to contradict something that Brian Johnson said about sleep, right? So he was saying about, like you said, the importance of 8 hours sleep. And there was another guy who was saying, actually, hang on, our generations are the only generations that have promoted it. It was an old, and they found information from a long time. Actually, in the old times, they promoted 4 hours, a break in 4 hours. Wild. Look into it, right? And that is hustle culture to a degree, right? If you look at, Elon Musk or Bill Gates, I remember that Arnold Schwarzenegger always had that quote, quote of, how do you fit so much into a day? Sleep faster, right? So it brings me back onto your sort of space, right? We're talking about dangerous information, right? Stuff,
Mm.
peptides. There's so much in your space. This is why I don't talk about it, by the way. This is why I hold myself back. I'm not expert level. I'm interested in it, but I'm definitely not expert level like you. So I'd love to know, like, maybe what are some of like the hidden dangers, right? What are some of the most controversial things that you've heard that maybe have not quite sat right with you?
Yeah. Sorry about that. I don't know if that ping got picked up there. Yeah. So, yeah, so this comes between disinformation and misinformation, right? And I think sometimes people have ill intent, so they put a lot of disinformation out. But I think majority of it is misinformation. I think it's people who are well intentioned that might not have the understanding or to the fullest capacity of what they need to actually promote something. In the space that I'm in, there's moments where I'm like, that is kind of like a half truth. So I'm like, there's elements there where you're like, you know, even what you were saying there in terms of sleep, have 4 hours, have a break 4 hours. That's kind of a half truth because you're meeting that 8 hours, right? But you're having that break and interrupted sleep, which depending on the period of your sleep cycle or what stage of REM you're in, that could also cause some sort of cognitive decline for the next day. However, is that better than only getting 4 hours? Yeah, of course. So there's kind of a half truth there. But at the same sense, it's that break of sleep, which also messes with your circadian rhythm the next day. You might feel yourself a little bit more lethargic, a little bit more brain fog just by having that interrupted sleep. So yeah, the misinformation that I see and some of the things that I've noticed is one of the aspects that I came through was that like kind of hustle culture, where you just got to keep grinding, you're keep pushing, that if you're not working 12 hours a day, that you're lazy. And those kind of things, it's just going to create more work for people like me. In the sense of like, well, you can keep hustling, but eventually you're going to get yourself to burnout. And I think that's part and parcel of where we've come to. The world is also in such disarray that being able to hold all these different things and constant context switching is something that is also quite damaging. But there's almost this way where it's glorified being able to, he runs like 7 or 8 different companies and he's got this going on. He's got this podcast, he does speaking, he does X, Y, and Z. And it just got compounding all those things. I'm like, it sounds cool. And when you look at it, like, wow, maybe that's something, if he can do it, something that I can do. Not everybody's level of resilience is exactly the same either. There's some people that can manage 3 enterprises at once. If you were to follow them during the day, you'd probably find that they're managing one entirely for a whole week and then their content switch to the next place. You're not running between all these different things all at once. And when you look at social media and the way that it's perpetrated, it's like, well, he jumps from this, he jumps from this, he jumps from this. And it looks like it's like this ideal of what you should strive for. And one of the ones that kind of comes to mind is like Alex Hormozy. He's got a very strong work ethic. But if you saw a little bit of his podcast with Tony Robbins, you just find out that it comes from a large place of maybe a trauma response. And he's just utilized it and become very effective at what he does. And that's not a healthy space to be in. You can see that he's a man who's achieved beyond what most people would achieve, really. But he's not really happy within that achievement either. He might come across a little bit content, but I think this is where he's trying to create the influences because he's striving for that meaning and purpose in what he does. So following him as an example, I'd be like, well, you don't have the resources and capacity that he does. He built himself many companies and opportunities and connections before he went and did the social media thing, before he started that ground. He had the resources, he had people that could do the editing, he had a bunch of things. You guys will know that now you're going to want to go clip this. And when you clip it, that's work. That takes mental energy. And yeah, our brains is constantly wanting to use energy, hence why it's lazy. It's kind of hedonistic in nature, and it's going to say to you, well, let's have a break. Let's see things as a threat so that we slow down, right? And that can work against you or can kind of work for you. You've got to understand what your brain is telling you. And yeah, the misinformation is it's people with goodwill, but then there's sometimes people who put disinformation. I can't think of anything off the top of my hand, but there have been things I've seen that I'm like, well, that's not necessarily true. That might have been true 10 years ago. Now you're reflecting it now. And again, the world of psychology and space keeps moving a lot. Even just
Yeah.
the form. So neurogenesis is your brain's ability to heal itself. There's been arguments throughout literature, like, is this even true or is it not? Like parts of your hippocampus can repair itself or not. And you could really find an argument on both ends. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of things that change and you just have to keep abreast. And I think that's what's important. If you're going to put that information out there, do some self-learning. I don't mind people doing that. You don't have to have the master's degree. I mean, definitely beneficial so you can understand how to read papers, how to interpret it, look at like the validity of it, look at the reliability of it. That is important. And I think if you're going to follow people, try and find people who have that, but test it. Be discerning in all things.
Great question for both of you. Um, if I'm going to think about that, if I was going to coin it, it'd be toxic productivity, right? That might be wrong, but that's the way that I would see it. Mark, I've got a question for you. I'm going to leave it with you for a little bit in terms of toxic productivity. I get the feeling that more people than ever are using AI, ChatGTP, these fitness rings and all that sort of stuff. Even Apple, you can monitor everything, right? To monitor all that sort of stuff. I think 68% of people self-diagnose themselves with a GTP, all this sort of stuff. For me, I think that's incredibly dangerous, right? Especially from, me, even my space, and I'm not expert level thinking that stage. I can't imagine what you think of looking at people self-diagnose themselves with that sort of stuff, right? And I'm going to leave that with you, but I'm going to bring this on to you with Dan. You know the sleep story I said, right, about Brian Johnson? What they do on X is they use Grok to critique it to see if it's real, right? They don't have that on LinkedIn, right? So that means on LinkedIn and on Instagram, and Substack, people can post whatever they want. They can go and say you need 6 hours sleep to be productive. They say you can go and take X amount of creatine or whatever to increase brain function, and it can mean shit. It can mean nothing, right? It's just a lie, isn't it, right? Pipe dream, whatever. But on X, there's Grok, right? To almost like test it. What's your thoughts on that? Does that mean that X is the most honest space for this sort of toxic productivity?
Yeah, it's a good question, actually. To be honest, I've never really used Grok to fact check anything. I know people do it, and I've seen like community notes and stuff like that. They're quite useful for that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I mean, there's studies that you could prove anything with any study, really, I guess. But it's the end result of the actual thing. So that activity is, say, felt good on 4 hours of sleep. But what was the actual, like, what are the numbers? What's the result? Did you get more work done? Did you get more success in relationships? I don't know. Probably not. If you actually check those numbers. And people care about the results rather than just the activity. They don't really care about like burnout and stuff like that. They want the result of it. So will I feel better? Will I get more from it? I think that's really important to talk more about rather than like the activity itself.
Good point. It's a good point. So, Mark, over to you, mate. AI in this space, dangerous or not? What's your thoughts?
I think AI in this space is going to remain regardless. I think there comes a responsibility to the people who use it. like anything, right? Even social media comes with a level of responsibility. You're putting something on the internet that's going to remain forever. People who self-diagnose with AI, yeah, that can be quite problematic because if I really had to sit with somebody for a while, I can look at the symptomatology of a lot of things, and I could diagnose people with an array of certain things, from personality disorders to affective disorders, which is kind of like your mood disorders, etc. Like you can really find anything for everything. And again, I think it's a person's search for meaning for what they're experiencing. And AI just makes it easier to give you a sense of meaning. And kind of like anecdotally to individuals that I watch and look into the space in terms of AI, there's elements where mental health organizations are trying to kind of align AI to give you the best possible advice and then refer you onto a therapist, right? There is mental health programs now that are trying to do that. Whether it's doing it successfully or not is yet to be seen. It's such a new space that the data it jumps around, right? Like there's some people that there's an element of like empathic AI, which they can relate to you, make you feel more human. I think if you have, in terms of a psychoeducative point of view, AI could probably be beneficial, right? For you to, let's say somebody diagnoses you with borderline personality disorder, you can then understand what that means and give you a bit more psychoeducative level. But for you to go and give your AI a bunch of like symptoms and be like, does this represent borderline? It might pick up one or two things that could be in correlation, and then you could run with that and be like, AI said there's three things here, but meanwhile, there's an whole array that you need in terms of the DSM to be able to diagnose yourself with something. It shouldn't do that. I think within ChatGPT and Claude, it kind of says, I'm not diagnosing you, but this is for your understanding, right? And I
Mm,
think that's how they cover their bases. But we will interpret that as whatever. You said that there could be, and I want to have that label, so I'm giving it reason and meaning. So it's the sound meaning that we put onto these things that become dangerous. Going back to your space in terms of what it's like on X and fact checking, I think that's really important. AI might be a very useful tool to do that. I'm not really on X, so I don't know the ins and outs of how Grok is used and utilized there. The community notes, I've seen some funny memes and things come out where people fact check people, and like, that's clearly not true, which can be quite entertaining on you as a consumer point of view of that content. But yeah, I think that's going to be necessary. I
yeah.
do think that just with misinformation that's out of there, again, not intentional. I don't think everybody out there is trying to do something, and when there where it is disinformation, then yeah, that becomes a different viewpoint on that. Yeah, self-diagnosing, not a great idea. I wouldn't
No.
recommend it, but people are going to do it because they want to assign meaning for their experience.
Yeah, I've got a great answer for that. And then, Mark, I'll leave you to the part of the episode where you asked Dan a question, about the coaching space. So, me and Dan at the Coach Trap over the last few months have had quite a few people ask us about AI in coaching. We had someone who reached out very professionally, if you like, and said, "Look, I think that I can create an AI that can replace you and coach your clients." And I said, "Hang on, life coaching clients?" And he said, "Yes." And I had to remind him, "Do you know how dangerous that is?" And I said, "Have you ever life coached anyone yourself?" And he goes, "No." So I said, "How can you ever understand what that relationship's like between a coach and a client, what problems these people have? AI has no lived experience, right?" So I come to another point to this guy, and I was like, "Look, hang on, I'll give you an example of someone, the sort of client that I get. I had a man who'd just come out of prison. He wanted to rebuild his life. He found his wife in bed with someone that he worked with, and he shot the guy in the leg and went to prison." I said, "How the hell can an AI ever coach something like that?" The real answer is it must never, ever. So hence, me and Dan were in a conversation this week and last week with a coach that we know, saying that they're going to create an AI version of themselves. And I said, it's ludicrous, ludicrous. It's the most craziest thing, I think, to damage your brand is to put AI in at that sharp end, if that makes sense. So it has to be a human made decision. And I'll tell you what, even the biggest name himself does it, Tony Robbins. I can't believe that he's got an AI of himself. But
Wow.
Mark, let's pass it to you. What an amazing story, right? What an amazing journey that you've been on. But in this part, we wanna motivate and give coaches, something that they can take home. So in this space, right, is there anything that maybe you've got for Dan, a marketing perspective or anything sort of tech based that maybe Dan can answer for you?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say that it's a perspective of my own, right? I think it's the element of there's and you we've spoken about this just before, is looking at, we're going to need more individuals that are in this space of coaching, right? In this space of mentorship coaching, even in terms of like lay counseling and to some extent. And I wanted to ask Dan, like, how do you reflect that element of the human touch in the space that's out there, right? Like, because you were already talking about strategy, and each platform has its own unique strategy. How do you maintain a cohesive voice? Like you said, X, you can be controversial, where on LinkedIn, that might not be something that works for that particular platform. And maybe something like TikTok video kind of approaches, it might help to be a little bit controversial or say something that gets people thinking, right? Like you have these strategies of like, what is your hook? What is the body? How are you entering it? What's your CTA? But I think in all of that, you can get lost in trying to chase that rather than the authenticity behind the message. So how do you merge the two? Long
Yeah.
explanation to a question, but yeah.
100%. That's a great question, actually. I think for sure you can get lost in the platforms and each one and all the things you can do with them. Ultimately, it's just about showing people that one, they need coaching, and two, you're the right coach for them. So you need to ultimately share your story, is the biggest thing, your client story as well. They want to see the transformation rather than you just throwing out information at them. They want you to package that information so that they understand it and they know what to do next, which is where the CTA comes in. So people can definitely overcomplicate it, over strategize. But it's kind of just the same as if you're in a networking event, a conversation, you'd say, oh, so you'd ask them a couple of questions and you'd be like, okay, I've seen that before with XYZ. This is what you should do. You can take my business card, whatever, look on my website. So that's ultimately what I see social media as, rather than trying to shout and make more noise. And because we do need more coaches, but we need those coaches to be visible so that people know they exist. Otherwise, there's no point in them really being there, if that makes sense. So I hope that kind of answered that question.
Yeah, yeah, I think it does. It's that element of like, you're coming to me with some sort of problem, and I can say to you, okay, here's the authentic solution for that problem. It's being able to relay that in a context that works for the platform. So again, your example, and I'm like, oh, that's a brilliant example for X, is like, you're lying to yourself if you think you need less than 8 hours sleep. It's still the same fundamental core truth behind it. It's just the wording and the packaging has changed a little bit. So I think it's for coaches to be very clear on who it is they want to reach and how, and their own message behind it. Like, is it in essence still them? Because I could say, look, you need 8 hours sleep, pretty bland. But then you could say, well, you're lying to yourself if you think it's the same sort of message, just packaged in a different way. So yeah, I like that. I think it is that connection point, and not having to chase the particular platform's algorithm per se, but rather just chase what is fundamentally true to you.
Nailed exactly what the coach trap is, did he, Dan? That is the best example I think
100%.
I've heard, right? So turning your message into a business to escape the coach trap is what this is all about. So if you buy a guru's PDF, if you buy something from one of them, they will tell you that vanity metrics win, right? So they'll tell you have to create the flashiest funnel, paid ads, whatever, lots of numbers bring in, right? But the only problem is AI and paid ads won't fix a poor message, right? That the real test of this is like what me and Dan call it, is the holiday test. So that feeling when you're in a foreign land, somewhere far away, and you hear someone with the same accent, and you want to know who they are, right? You want to go over them and say, "Hey, how are you? What were you doing here?" That is that magic moment, and that actually goes from, done it, Dan. Actually, in this space, as the coach, we call it the OnlyFans paradox, where pretty much all of the coaches market themselves as an OnlyFans creator. Me, me, me. Look how great I am. You have to change that around, right? So instead of putting yourself as the hero, you put the client as the hero and you as the guide. What your message should be is all about finding that common enemy. All right. And that's what a PDF can't teach you from a guru. That's what AI can't give you. And that's ultimately, Dan, what this is about, isn't it? In the coach route, is not to worry about vanity metrics, to stop trying to appeal to everyone, because you talk to no one, but we're trying to appeal to the very smallest viable option, which is your tribe and your audience. So, Mark, that was such a great example there of what the coach trap is. Mark, just before we finish, where's the best place to find you?
So the best place to find me would be, at this point, it would be LinkedIn, my own personal website. And I've also recently just started TikTok. I don't really use Instagram, getting back into that. And now you've intrigued my interest in X, just with the point of being a little bit controversial, because it sounds like that could be quite fun too. But I'm not on there yet either. But yeah, I'll send those links through.
Yeah, that's a great place to leave it. Mark, thank you so much for joining us. Dan, as always, such a pleasure, buddy. And for everyone who's
Thank you.
watching, whatever you do, don't fall into the coach trap.